For this video, I just have one simple question. How does an object move from point A to point B? That's it. It's a really simple question. But I really want to point out something which is really important for the way we understand reality. So there are two possible ways to approach this question. Number one, an object moves from point A to point B frame per frame, or pixel per pixel, or unit of distance per unit of distance. Number two, an object moves from point A to point B in an infinitely fluent way, like a wave. So immediately we are dealing with some kind of particle-wave duality. If an object moves pixel per pixel, then you must understand that it actually jumps from one pixel to the next pixel instantly. It doesn't move fluently to the next pixel. Now let me actually show you a practical example of this. Here you see a video of the famous Snake game that you could play on an old Nokia mobile phone back in the days. Now notice that this is a game with very low pixels, and you can actually see how the snake moves in a rather stuttering way. It doesn't move fluently at all. It moves step by step. It jumps to the next position almost instantaneously, and it takes quite a big jump. So that's what I mean with moving pixel per pixel or frame per frame. Now, if you recreate this game with a lot more pixels, then each jump or step it takes will be a lot smaller. It will take smaller jumps because the pixels will become smaller. So it will take smaller jumps, but also a lot more jumps. The more pixels you have, the more jumps it has to take. So in this way, it will seem as if it moves more fluently. And so if we continue this logic, the smaller the pixels become, the more fluently it will seem to move. This is why video games with high pixels look so realistically. So now I can finally ask the following question. Is reality itself made out of an infinite amount of pixels? This question has been asked many times before. This is not an original question at all, but still it's interesting. If reality is made out of an infinite amount of pixels, then everything will move perfectly fluently. There won't be any stuttering at all. Everything will move from point A to point B without jumping from one unit of distance to the next unit of distance. Now notice that a unit of distance is the equivalent of a pixel. One pixel represents one Planck length, for example, which is considered to be the smallest distance in the universe. So, is reality made out of an infinite amount of pixels, or does it have a finite amount of pixels? But first, let's come back to our snake game and let us try to truly understand what it means to jump from one pixel to the next pixel. If reality was actually made out of separate pixels, then what would happen is an object would actually jump infinitely fast from one pixel to the next pixel. So in fact, an object would instantly teleport itself to the next pixel. And let me explain why. Because an object cannot travel fluently within the space between two pixels. An object moves instantly from one pixel to the next pixel. So if you take this very literally, if an object starts at pixel A and it wants to move to pixel B, then it would vanish out of existence within pixel A and flash back into existence within pixel B. Do you understand what I mean? This is really important to understand. I really want you to get this. If the snake starts within pixel A and it moves to pixel B, then it will vanish out of existence within pixel A and it will instantly pop back into existence within pixel B. That's what it means for objects if they exist in a universe with separate pixels. That's how the mechanism of moving through pixels works. Now, is this logical? Would you consider that to be possible? Do particles jump in and out of existence in order to manifest into another location? I don't know. Now, let's think about the idea that reality is made out of an infinite amount of pixels such that everything will move perfectly fluently. If everything moves perfectly fluently, then the space in which everything is moving becomes a continuity, a perfect continuity. Now, within a continuity, there is no point A or point B. There are no points at all. Because within a continuity, there are an infinite amount of points, and so it will become so infinitely dense with points that each individual point will actually completely merge with every other point. They will all merge together to such an extent that they will unify into one single continuous field. And so there won't be any separate individual points anymore. That's what I mean with continuity. So how does an object move within a continuous field? Well, it's difficult to imagine because within a continuity there is no basic unit of distance. There is no basic unit of distance since a continuity is made up of infinitely small pixels, and therefore a basic unit of distance can also be infinitely small. But that makes it impossible to actually measure a certain distance, because any distance would always contain an infinite amount of basic units of distance. Any distance would always be infinite. Now this has a lot to do with the paradox of Zeno, and I remember Steen Peterson making this comment in another video. Quote, even if the smallest thing in that space was infinitely small, it would still be able to travel around in the space as long as its speed was infinitely times its own diameter per unit time. It can cover an infinitely small distance in an infinitely short time. Unquote. Well, mathematically, that's probably true, but still I fail to comprehend. It doesn't satisfy my understanding. An infinitely small distance is still a distance. It's not zero. Okay? The concept infinitely small means really, really, really small, but not zero. But for my understanding, it doesn't matter how small a distance might be. If it contains a certain amount of distance, it would become a finite pixel. Even when it's infinitely small, that's still a distance. And so we would still be dealing with the stuttering effect. An object would still move from pixel to pixel by popping out of existence in one pixel and popping back into existence in the next pixel. So within a perfect continuity, there is no such thing as a certain amount of distance. There is no such thing as infinitely small distance. Again, within a continuity, everything is merged together and unified into one single continuous field. The infinite amount of individual separate points or pixels are totally unified. So there is only one thing. There are no infinite amounts of separate pixels anymore. There is only one continuous infinite thing, but it doesn't contain separate things within itself anymore. You see, that's what a continuity is. And so if there are no separate pixels anymore, this whole continuous field becomes totally interconnected. It would become so interconnected, so unified, that it would seem as if this infinitely stretched out field is actually an infinitely small point, a singularity, if you will, in which everything becomes totally one with everything else, such that it becomes utterly impossible to separate a thing from another thing. Everything will literally become the exact same singular thing. So an infinite amount of individual separate pixels would literally become one and the same thing. So if everything is literally the exact same thing within a continuity, then your whole notion of distance would completely collapse. There won't be any more difference between here and there, between up and down, between very close and far away, because there is no more difference between anything. It's all exactly the same. So the concept of very close would literally become the same as the concept of far away. There would be no difference at all between very close and far away. And that's what a continuity is. So I believe that space itself, or whatever it is that makes it possible for anything to exist, is a continuity. So for space itself, distance doesn't matter. There is no difference between any point in space. It's all exactly the same point. Now I remember Steen Petersen also saying that I should think of space itself as total emptiness and not as a thing. So he says space is infinitely empty, and in my view it's infinitely full and unified. But you see, there's no difference between infinite emptiness and infinite fullness, because theoretically infinite emptiness is a continuity and infinite fullness is also continuity, as I have explained. Now the properties of a continuity remains the same. It doesn't matter whether it's a continuity of emptiness or a continuity of fullness. A continuity is a continuity. And again, there are no differences within a continuity. So there is also no difference between emptiness and fullness. But here we're talking about a higher level of continuity. For now, I'm just talking about distance. So back to the initial question, how does an object move from point A to point B within a continuity? Well, for the continuity itself, the object doesn't move at all. For the continuity itself, the object remains at the same position forever, because there is no difference between location A and location B for the continuity. Location A is also exactly location B. So if you start at location A, you are simultaneously at location B, and also simultaneously at location C and D and E and so on. You are at an infinite amount of locations at the same time, when perceived from within a continuity itself. So for the continuity itself, every object in the universe that has ever existed and will exist are all manifesting everywhere at an infinite amount of locations at once simultaneously. Okay? So in reality, a piece of dog shit is actually manifesting all over the universe all at once. Well, that sounds ridiculous. Well, that's because our notion of what an object is way too vague. What is an object? What is a thing? Does there exist a distinction between empty space and things that are manifesting within empty space? If so, where do you draw the boundary between empty space and not empty space? Does an object occupy space? Does an electron occupy space? What is the substance of a subatomic particle? Does that substance occupy empty space? Is there anything at all in the universe that occupies empty space? We all know that an atom mostly contains empty space. But the actual matter that makes up an atom, what is that essentially? What makes up an electron? Is it a force? What is a force? Is there a difference between a force and empty space? I just want to know whether or not we make a clear distinction between empty space and an electron, for example. So empty space is continuous, it's a continuity, but what about an electron? Is an electron made out of a continuous substance is a force made out of a continuous substance. Anyway, enough questions for now. This video is becoming quite long again, so I'm just going to leave it like this and I will make a part 2 video. So in a nutshell, this part 1 video is about the continuity of space and what that implies for distance and motion. And the part 2 video will be about objects and their relationship with empty continuous space. Okay, so that's it. Bye bye.